All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's discussion on what the Visegrad 4 interests are in the next 5 years in European Union. The V4 is obviously a dynamic subject. It changes every time a government changes, which has been happening for a while now. Can we even speak of its joint interests? On what issues does it agree, on what issues does it disagree, and how does it play out now when there's all sorts of negotiations around the top jobs in the next Commission and European Parliament and in general EU institutions. My name is Barbara Zmušková. I'm editor at EURACTIV Slovakia, and this panel is being organized in collaboration with EURACTIV Poland, Czech Republic, and Hungarian organization Political Capital, with the gracious support of the International Visegrad Fund. And it is my pleasure to introduce today's panelists. We have here Slovak Member of Parliament Tomáš Valášek from Progresívne Slovensko, who will be joining us for the first half of the discussion. Good morning.
Good morning to everyone.
We have an analyst from Hungary, Ms. Dorka Takácsy, who is a foreign policy expert and researcher at the Center for Euro-Atlantic Integration and Democracy. Welcome.
Good morning.
From the Czech Republic, we have Ms. Pavlína Janebová, a research director at the Association for International Questions. Good morning.
Good morning.
And last but not least, we have MEP from the EPP group in Slovakia, Mr. Vladimír Bilčík. Good morning.
Good morning. I hope you can hear me and see me this time. I just have a technical remark. I hear everybody perfectly except for you, Barbara Zmušková. The sound is not as loud as the rest of the participants, so there may be an issue on your part. I'm just raising that as a technical issue. Thanks. Okay.
Thank you. I might speak closely to the microphone. Can you hear me better now?
Much better, much better.
Okay. So for a while, I'll be speaking more directly into my microphone, and maybe my colleagues will try some technical magic. Okay, so I also want to welcome our people who are watching us. If you have any questions, you can ask them directly here in the Zoom. There's this neat Q&A, question and answers functionality. You can ask them here or in the chat. I will be looking. So ask away, but let's get into the first question, which was already asked in the registration forms. It's what is V4 today when all these issues are being raised and discussed? Can it and does it present a united front? What are its interests? And where can we expect cooperation? Let me ask Mr. Valášek first, since he has to leave sooner.
Sure, great question. I'm glad you started with it. A bit of background, I need to leave because we vote at 11 o'clock, but I can be with you until about 10:50, and I certainly look forward to the conversation. I'm glad you started with definitions because the question posed to the event as such, whether the interest of V4 countries or V4 have been helped or hindered by the election, the answer comes down to the differences between V4 countries and V4. It is perfectly possible for a V4 country to have interest that it doesn't share with the rest of the Visegrad countries, and therefore it may rejoice at the outcome of the elections while the rest of the Visegrad countries are mourning. What is V4 today? Look, this will depend from a country to country, but what I'm going to say, it may be a bit controversial, but I do believe that the heydays of V4 were basically 2015, 2016. And that's primarily because at that time, in all of the Visegrad countries involved, governments in power broadly shared the same attitudes to the big issue of the day. There was migration. This was the days of Právo and Solidarność in Poland. Mr. Babiš was already a deputy prime minister in the Czech government. Mr. Fico was in charge here in Slovakia. And of course, Viktor Orbán was in charge in Hungary then, as he is now. What the four governments then converged on was basically a hard anti-migration and a so mild Eurosceptical position that united them. It wasn't as destructive an attitude that they have taken as it's occasionally described. The Slovak presidency used the combined political weight of the Visegrad countries in a fairly constructive way. We did actually propose at the time a paper on how to handle migration. The paper was floated initially as a Visegrad paper. Eventually other countries came on board. If my memory serves me well, the Baltic countries, Romania, and others. So it was again in 2015 and 2016 an entity bound by attitudes shared by all four countries to migration, and those attitudes almost sort of uniquely and neatly set them aside or set them apart from most other European countries. Ever since then, and bring it back to the present, we have not had the convergence of these four governments in power. The political cycles diverged. So where we are now is that whereas Hungary and Slovakia are run by governments that are still can broadly be described as Eurosceptic or anti-migration populist, there's huge differences between them, but let's not go into them. I think the broad characterization stands. Of course, what you have in Poland is a government of a Platforma, which of course campaigned against the same sort of Eurosceptical populist attitudes that in many ways Fico and Orbán represent, and the same holds true for the Czech Republic. So what you have is essentially not a V4, but sort of two V2s, if you will. So if we discuss, and I'm going to cut off here and rather than go straight into the debate on what individual Visegrad countries may welcome in the outcome of the elections or not. But the point that I felt important to make is that essentially V4 collectively doesn't have strong views on many things anymore, simply because of the divergences between the four countries involved. And it's not just substantive divergences, it's the attitudes to whether the European Union is a force for the good, or in case of Prime Minister Fico increasingly, and certainly in case of Viktor Orbán for a long time, whether the European Union is sort of a straw man that he likes to build up and then knock down on any so suitable occasion. And because of those differences, I hold that there's essentially no way of discussing whether the elections have an impact on collective V4 interests, because there is very little, by the way, of collective V4 interest these days. So let's debate what the individual countries expected from the European Union and whether the elections delivered or not.
Thank you. Let's stay in Slovakia. Mr. Bilčík, I think we'll all agree on the differences. But what are the joint interests? There's little of them, but what are they? Are there any? Mr. Bilčík, wanted to ask that question to you.
Well, thank you very much, and a very, very good morning. Let me begin by maybe following up on what Tomáš Valášek has said on the quotation marks glory days of the Visegrad group in the European context. I actually will go even further back in history, because I think the best time when the V4 really worked together was right before we entered the European Union. So over 20 years ago. I think we've always had the challenge of defining the common agenda, common approach, common strategy inside the European Union ever since we joined. What historically has been the biggest glue of the V4 has been the return to Europe, the story surrounding return to Europe, with many difficulties still going back to 1990s. But nonetheless, I'd say that this was always our strength. And in that sense, I'd say that the one issue where we can still be broadly united, although we have various interests and points of focus, is the issue of enlargement, is the issue of a wider Europe. This is where we joined forces together over 20 years ago. And this is where we can also broadly join forces today. Of course, looking at it from very different starting points, and also with very different geographic and geopolitical priorities. But that is certainly one issue where I would see some convergence despite deep political differences among the V4 countries at the moment. And this is something that no doubt will also be one of the focal points of the upcoming Hungarian presidency of the EU Council. That's maybe one geopolitical issue. But in terms of other questions, where of course the V4 countries have been approaching the EU agenda in a common sense is, apart from the defensive reflex, which again Tomáš has referred to in terms of migration, because it's been rather defensive reflex in terms of this is what we do not want, is a set of issues surrounding financial redistribution of resources inside the European Union. EU funds, cohesion fund, structural funds. The funding issue as such, again, has been something which has often brought the countries together in a broad strategic sense. Of course, when it came to individual priorities and individual sets of sums of money which each country was looking at, then there was also a lot of competition. But I would maybe stick to these issues for the moment. And I think one of the big challenges or problems we are facing in Central Europe at the moment is having an influential common voice in terms of setting an agenda which also leaves a lasting stamp on the European priorities as we look ahead. Part of it is a power issue. Two of the V4 countries today are very sparsely represented in the newly elected European Parliament when it comes to having any consequential influence on the power game. And of course, more broadly also the fact that we have an increasing and openly Eurosceptic leaders in several V4 countries. We can discuss this in more detail. And then, of course, makes it very difficult to set any positive agenda for the European Union.
Yes, thank you. So thank you for speaking about the cohesion funds. Yes, V4 countries are beneficiaries, so they will probably push for more money coming their way if it is not suspended, as in cases of Hungary, and that is continually being threatened in Slovakia, not so much in Poland anymore. So let's move on to other countries. Ms. Takácsy, how is it viewed in Hungary? What is something that Hungary wants to collaborate with other V4 countries on the European Union, in the European Union?
Well, that's a very good question. And frankly, I often contemplate whether the current state of the V4, as we perceive it oftentimes, this is a structure which oftentimes feels kind of as an empty shell, waiting to be filled with something, waiting to be filled with another topic, another thematic, another agenda setting item. And frankly, I think that probably the phase we see now is probably a return to normal, simply because actually after joining the EU, after joining NATO, so there was a target set and reached, then fine. So then afterwards there were a few years with very little imminent need for a very close cooperation, and the Visegrad being a not properly or not strongly institutionalized form of cooperation as it is, it basically allows for it to be kind of treated as a form of cooperation, which basically, even if there is no need to further push it, that basically is going to stay that way. It's going to be kind of in a waiting mode, waiting to be used. And eventually, I entirely agree with what was voiced previously, that we have seen this shell being filled at the immigration crisis, and eventually it was kind of hijacked in a way in 2015, 16, and so on. But afterwards, now that this is basically a thing of the past, I see a way for a rather pragmatic cooperation for the future. So as it was also voiced already, I see as a potential target to work together for is definitely the agriculture. There are certain interests which definitely and still do unite V4 countries. And it was already mentioned and voiced by the leaderships of these V4 countries that farmers' protection receives and enjoys priority. These countries basically said jointly no to the Ukrainian grain and so on. So there are certain points where definitely we can see some agreement, but altogether I think that unfortunately we cannot really bypass the question of Russia and Ukraine, which definitely stands there as a very divisive point. So I can clearly see this 2+2 scenario for the future, because this is definitely something which is going to reflect not only with regards to Russia, with regard to energy security, with regards to defense and so on, but also to the EU enlargement. So that is something which I think that we cannot really bypass and which seems to be effectively competing and creating an obstacle for having another heyday anytime soon, I think, for cooperation.
Thank you. So far we have identified cohesion funds, agriculture, and we already have a question from the audience, which is about the industry. In Slovakia, definitely, I think in Poland as well, the car manufacturing industry is very important. And now in the attempts to transition into electric mobility, the investment in these countries is going to be a very big topic. In Slovakia and in Hungary, the Chinese investment is something that the government is very much interested in. And that is, the discussion is sometimes in opposition to green policies or green interests of the European Union. There are many countries in the sense of many political parties which are against, for example, the ban on combustion engines. So let me pose these questions to Ms. Janebová. So on the question of Russia, the Czech Republic is obviously not in agreement in Slovakia. The relationship is not great at the moment, as well as Hungary. But when it comes to these issues, for example, such as fight back against the Green Deal, which I think your government is not the biggest fan of the Green Deal, is the Czech government going to be interested in using or filling this V4 shell and presenting a united front on this anti-green agenda, even if it disagrees with Orbán and Fico on Russia? What do you think?
Thank you for this question. If I should give you a short answer, I would say no. This current Czech government isn't or hasn't really been much in favor of deepening the V4 cooperation. It has been quite cold towards the format ever since February 2022 and the second Russian invasion in Ukraine. Still, the V4, I would have to say, is a concept or a format that is part of the Czech foreign and most of all regional policy. So while the Visegrad 4 has had its ups and downs over the more than 30 years of its existence, I would say now at this moment, when it comes to the European affairs, the EU policy or foreign policy, and the shared interests when it comes to foreign policy of the four Visegrad countries, there isn't much to speak about in the context of the V4, but it remains working regional platform, even though I would say the level of trust from the current Czech government to especially the Slovak representatives of the Slovak government and the Hungarian government is quite low. That has been mirrored in the program of the still current Czech presidency of the Visegrad 4, which is about to end in about 2 weeks. And from what I've heard, it's also this sort of a low profile of the Visegrad cooperation is also mirrored in the program of the upcoming Polish presidency. So we can't really at this moment expect that the V4 would sort of come to what has been called in this discussion the heyday of the Visegrad cooperation some 8 years back. Having said that, we have a general election coming up next year, and it's very likely that the current biggest opposition party will win, and somebody from that party will become the prime minister. It's a question whether it will be Andrej Babiš himself or someone close to him. But we all might remember that in the years 2015-16, even now, the relationships between Andrej Babiš and Viktor Orbán, and also between Andrej Babiš and Robert Fico, have been great. And we probably can expect that Andrej Babiš would like to increase the intensity of the relations that currently are sort of on a lower profile. To your question about Czechia's opposition to Green Deal and the willingness to act together with the Visegrad partners on fighting the Green Deal, I would say yes. Czechia hasn't been the most enthusiastic about the Green Deal and, for example, getting rid of the combustion engines. And there have been some strong criticism coming even from the strongest governmental party, which is the Civic Democrats. But I would argue that even though Czechia and the current government have been cautious, the overarching interest at this point is for Czechia to be a constructive partner in the European Union. I think it started with the successful Czech presidency in the second half of 2022, when Czechia was praised for what the government actually managed to achieve in negotiating different files at the EU level. And I think the Czech government wants to continue this trend. And even if there are some perhaps critical points, Czechia is very cautious in delivering them in a constructive manner. And that is something that differentiates, I would say, Czechia from, for example, Hungary, because it's not only different in interests when it comes to the V4, but it's also a different kind of behavior. And I think that, sorry for speaking about Hungary, but I think Hungary is a picture of a behavior that doesn't really necessarily bring trust of the EU partners. I would end here, and looking forward to the further discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Janebová. So that is an interesting point, maybe surprising to me that Czech Republic will be this principled when it comes to ad hoc cooperation on issues it cares about, and it will not cooperate with the V4. But as you correctly mentioned, if Andrej Babiš becomes the prime minister, we might have a different V3 on our hands with Fico, Orbán, and Babiš. We might see a return to the V4's heyday, but let's speak about the top jobs and the negotiations that are happening today. Let me give out some interesting things being said by Slovakia, who is represented in Brussels by President Peter Pellegrini, because our Prime Minister Fico is still recovering after the very serious attack that has been that has happened against him. Pellegrini said that Slovakia initially very much wanted a representative from Central and Eastern Europe for the NATO Secretary General, but then changed and said that we will support Mark Rutte if we get some sort of air defense support. So it has used the V4 Central Europe representative as sort of a bargaining chip to get something.
And then also interestingly, he said that Kaja Kallas is an Eastern candidate for the High Representative, but he wants to see her do diplomacy of the all four cardinal directions, as Slovak parties like to say. Obviously, Kaja Kallas is very hawkish on Russia and China. So let me ask Mr. Valášek, what do you think of Pellegrini's statements on these negotiations?
Thanks. I'm glad you raised the issue of top jobs, because in addition to migration, enlargement, EU money, that was the other issue on which we usually cooperated. There are others on this call, Vladimír Bilčík in particular, who know more about how business in Europe is done. Vladimír served, of course, as member of parliament, European Parliament for a long time. But to state the obvious, the jobs you have, the number of people you have in the various cabinets, the sort of commissioners you can place and which portfolios they hold, that dictates how much power and influence you have over EU business. So, and we used to, as a V4, cooperate on securing the maximum gains for us in terms of EU personnel. But here too, I'm skeptical that this time around, after these particular elections, V4 will be particularly relevant or important, because in addition to the things that have already been mentioned, let me point out two other reasons playing against close coordination of the top jobs. The first one is, those two reasons are essentially the V4 collaboration for at least some of the V4 members is not particularly useful, and B, it may actually be toxic. Let me begin with the toxic. To state the obvious, Viktor Orbán isn't a particularly popular person in Brussels. I don't see what Poland has to gain when somebody with the stature of Donald Tusk, not just a current prime minister and an ex-prime minister, but of course an ex-head of the European Council, I don't see what he stands to gain by teaming up with Viktor Orbán on anything, right? Because Poland by itself carries so much weight. Poland naturally then looks obviously to Germany and France in their other format, the Weimar Triangle, because those countries, an association with those countries adds weight to Polish positions. Association with Viktor Orbán diminishes it. So for that simple reason, in power politics, these things matter. You don't want to spend too much time with associating with your own positions with Viktor Orbán's positions, because you diminish chances that they become established EU views. First of all. Second of all, even if there was an alignment, even in case Viktor Orbán or Robert Fico were not toxic, they're still of little value to people like Donald Tusk or even the present Czech government, simply because both Pravo and Solidarność are, of course, members of established big political families in the European Union, whereas, of course, Robert Fico is essentially isolated. He was his party Smer membership in the socialist political grouping was suspended. Peter Pellegrini's party, he's president, but he's still retained. Shame on him. Slovak presidents used to be apolitical. He broke with the tradition by retaining honorary membership and not just honorary leadership in his own Hlas party. The Hlas party had its candidacy to the political grouping suspended by the socialists. Therefore, neither of the two Slovakia's big ruling parties have access to the heft and the weight that association with the big political families in Brussels brings. So I take note of President Pellegrini's words in Brussels, which you rightly repeated. But I also note that Peter Pellegrini, in the same breath, attacked by name Antonio Costas, the candidate for the European Council, who is from the same political family that Hlas aspires to join. So the question I'm asking to myself is, how do you actually want, as a representative of the Slovak Republic, to see Slovakia's interest materialize when you attack the only ally, and in fact the most important ally, your own political grouping, your own political family, that you need, whose support you need to push through Slovakia's interest? And when I try to look at Slovakia's behavior or the behavior of the current Slovak ruling coalition through the eyes of, say, Poland, what I see, again, in case of Viktor Orban, is somebody whose association with whom is toxic and therefore damaging to my interest. And when I look at, through Polish eyes, at the association with, say, Robert Fico or even Peter Pellegrini, they may be, in case of Peter Pellegrini, less toxic, but they're not particularly useful because they're in fight with their own socialist family. And just to make it even more complicated, the only MEP, the only member of European Parliament that Hlas did manage to elect and send into the European Parliament, Mr. Ondruš, actually waged a really ugly campaign against Ursula von der Leyen. So they don't want Kostas from the Socialist fraction for the head of a council, but nor do they want EPP candidate Ursula von der Leyen for the head of a commission. So they're essentially without allies. So without allies and sort of in a fight with everybody involved, they are not of much use to Poland, not of much use to the Czech Republic. That's the other reason we will not see V4 spring to action during these bargaining and negotiations, because in addition to the difference on the substance of the positions we hold, it's a simple fact that the association with V4 for Polish and Czech governments in particular is either toxic or not particularly useful.
Thank you. And since you have to leave in 10 minutes, I will ask you a different question before I move to other panelists. We can use your as much as we can. And the question is, while the V4 countries don't agree on Russia, what about Trump? Trump is more of a problem because EU and NATO will have to develop further in order to become more effective, operative, internationally relevant. So will the V4 cooperate in the process, I think, of having a more sovereign defense policy? And what will be the V4's response on Trump?
The honest answer is that I don't have the faintest idea, for the simple reason that I don't believe Donald Trump knows what Donald Trump is going to do if and when he becomes a US president. I agree that the odds are he will be reelected. The polls in the swing states, the states that really matter, put him clearly ahead. There isn't a single swing state where Joe Biden is leading. Donald Trump is leading in most of them. So all things being equal, which they never are, and the elections are not until November, but and what is it, 4 months, 5 months is eternity in politics. But all things being equal, Donald Trump will be reelected. But all we know on his attitudes to NATO is that he doesn't like it. He doesn't like alliances of any sort. This is not a new view. He has taken out an ad in the 1980s in the Chicago Tribune, New York Post, and elsewhere criticizing allies for diminishing US power. This is something he deeply believes. It comes from his experience and practice in business. So we know he is going to be talking badly about NATO, but that's about all we know. Right? At one point during the first term in power, he tried to withdraw from NATO, or at least he floated the idea. It was immediately nixed by people around him, thank God. But he may try to condition the provision of US support on countries needing the support, meeting at least 2, maybe even 3% of GDP on spending on defense. So that's the sort of things we can do. But honestly, I have no idea, other than the NATO's ability to deter Russia will be diminished. I have no idea what the impact of Trump on European defense will be. You're right in principle. The less reliable the collective security guarantees through NATO are, the more some countries in Europe, and that's a question we need to pose ourselves in this part of the world as well, the more some countries in Europe will look for other arrangements, whether coalitions or trying to put the European Union in a position where that NATO used to occupy. But again, how do you do that when when Poland and Czech Republic view and regard Russia as essentially an existential threat and are actually doing what they believe in? They do as they say. Poland is about to spend 4% of GDP, I believe, on defense. They're about to acquire so many tanks that they will soon have a bigger tank armies than, say, France or Great Britain. So they will be a proper European military power, continental military power. So in principle, it makes a lot of interest for Slovakia, for example, to align closely with Poland, which is our neighbor to the north, because in case of trouble on Slovak border and in case Donald Trump either blocks or slows down NATO response, we would obviously welcome support from Poland. But how do you even start going about it when Slovakia and Poland, about building that sort of coalition, about that sort of an agreement, when we diverge on the most important issue from for defense, which is who's your enemy, right? When Slovakia essentially blames Ukraine, that's sadly sad to say, that's the view of Prime Minister Fico. He essentially blames Ukraine for the trouble. How are you going to even start having a conversation with Poland and the Czech Republic about who defends who and how in case of trouble? I just don't see the defense relationship, even though it will be very important in case of Donald Trump election. I don't see that becoming a bond that unites the V4 countries, because if anything, as I forget whether it was Dorka or somebody else on this panel said, but if there's one issue that divides us the most currently, it's precisely attitudes to Ukraine and Russia.
Thank you very much. I think we used your attendance in this panel to its fullest. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. I can watch you for another 10 minutes or so because I am interested in what others have to say, but I'm going to have to go in about 10 minutes. I apologize. So let me say goodbye now, but I will watch and listen to you for another few minutes.
Yes, so thank you again and have a great vote in the parliament. Mr. Bilčík, let's get back to the top jobs before we dive into Trump. So we see Slovakia just trying to get what it wants personally. With Antonio Costa, it seems that the ruling parties want to be let in to the Social Democrats again. And they also want air defense. That is why they are supporting Mark Rutte. From Kaja Kallas, they want, I think, to hear something about Russia and China that they will be able to give back to their supporters in home. What do you think about this sort of bargaining chip behavior? And does it even matter that we have Central or Eastern European representation in the top jobs?
Well, thank you very much. I mean, let me start from the end. I think it matters enormously. And this is something which has been an issue every time we talk about top jobs. But we also see where the balance of power has shifted. You know, this is a V4 panel. We don't have anybody from Poland here on this panel. But if we talk about a power in the V4, which actually has an important say in terms of what's happening inside the European Union these days, it is Poland. Let's remember inside the EPP group, which is the largest group in the European Parliament, the clear winner of the European elections, two prime ministers were charged to co-lead the negotiations on the top jobs in the European Council. One of them is Donald Tusk. And I think the EPP at the moment, when it comes to the presence in Central Europe, is very much present, especially in Poland, but also strongly present in the Czech Republic with the Spolu coalition and Stan MEPs joining the EPP group now, which is going to strengthen that liberal wing of the EPP group. And I think this is where the strong power lies in terms of the decision-making on the top jobs. And I think that's my side remark also on the public statements by the newly elected president in Slovakia, Peter Pellegrini. I wouldn't over-strategize his statements. I think the main aim there is really to look at saving what is possible domestically, given Slovakia's international European position at the moment. And I wouldn't go beyond that. I also think that the NATO issue is very separate from the EU issue. And of course, the big contender from East Central Europe was Klaus Johannis for the top job in NATO. But I should also say Mark Rutte was and has been seen as a favorite for quite a few months now And that is a done deal. Now, in terms of the power game, I think it is important that East Central Europe is duly represented, and I think this is why Kaja Kallas has already been mentioned as part of the possible package deal on a top job as a new HRVP, also reflecting on what is the #1 security and foreign policy issue. And that's Russia's brutal and continued attack against Ukraine. This is going to define much of the agenda also for the next institutional cycle. And this is why Kaja Kallas has been put forward. Now, her standing is somewhat complicated by the fact that she comes from the Renew Group, which is the weakest link at the moment in the leading winning coalition in the European Parliament. This is why I think there is still going to be some tension and probably some question marks before there is a final deal hammered out on the 27th of June here. But when we talk about top positions, when we talk about the influence in East Central Europe, at the moment, inside the V4, the strongest cards are held by Poland, which I think, by the way, has quite an open ambition to also have a strong say in the future European position, not necessarily through top jobs, but through very influential jobs, looking at areas which are going to be defining for the next institutional cycle, such as, for instance, defense and defense portfolio in the widest sense. So this is where I would be looking. And in terms of Slovakia, unfortunately, we are in a position with the current government, which really is a face-saving position at best. Maroš Šefčovič has been put forward as the candidate for the next position in the European Commission, despite the fact that the current governing coalition in Slovakia, just like in Hungary, is not represented in any political groups. This is the only name and the only person who has any chance to pass through the grilling and the questioning process in the European Parliament. And I think it's also a sign of very difficult times for this governing majority which we have in our country, that you take a pick of someone who has been in European politics almost for 2 decades. You don't have any other names or any other nominees who would have the credibility or the standing to get the job. That just really undermines the overall weakness of the current government in Slovakia, not only with respect to our partners, but also with respect to the domestic standing and footing on European and foreign policy issues, which in these times of war is really a very unfortunate position. Last point, which I want to say on the European socialists and the position of the parties in Slovakia. This is not just about Costa, as Tomáš Valášek has rightly pointed out. It's also about the fact that I think inside the socialist group, there are some clear red lines, just like inside, I'm still part of the EPP group, and I know what the discussion was inside our group when we talked about accepting some new members, including Maďar Stisa from Budapest, which is an interesting move, by the way, something we can discuss. But I don't see in the current position, current standing, also given the campaign by both Smer and Hlas, that there is any quick or easy way of these parties in terms of getting into the socialist group. Moreover, it's not just a matter of the group, it's also a matter of the European Socialist Party, which is led by former Swedish Prime Minister Le Pen, who has been an extremely vocal opponent of any members in the socialist family who don't subscribe fully and consequently to the values of social democracy in a modern sense in Europe, including principles of rule of law, for instance, but also clear and principled stance when it comes to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So I think that is where I see a lot of skepticism about not only Hungary's underrepresentation in any major political groups following these elections, although I know Viktor Orbán is probably still going to try to get a place somewhere, but also in terms of the majority of newly elected Slovak MEPs from the governing majority and the extremist party of Republika, who are unlikely to be part of any political grouping, which again is a sign of terrible weakness when it comes to these parts of the V4.
Yes, thank you. I think that would be for a different discussion, but I would not put it past the Republika to manage to become a part of some sort of far-right new grouping. There's 100 free-floating MEPs. I think the possibilities of new groups which have extremist opinions is quite high, but let's go back to top jobs and let's go to Hungary. I have, maybe it is my mistake, but I haven't really seen or heard of Viktor Orbán trying to bargain and negotiate and get something out of these top jobs debate. Has he been? Is he in the background trying to get something for Hungary, Ms. Takácsy?
Well, frankly, I think that not that much, or if so, not super successfully. So as it was already mentioned, it would be tremendously important for the V4 regions to have people at top jobs. The same stands for Hungary. But there are actually really large red flags, I'd say. On the one hand, so what can we offer? Do we have competent enough people who have enough trust around them? And trust is a keyword here, which especially in Hungary's case is eroded to a large extent. So like who do we have to offer at all? Even the obligatory to fill positions recently in the recent years were very difficult to fill from Hungary's side. Let's remember, for instance, to László Trócsány's candidacy to be Hungary's European Commissioner. And basically his candidacy was rejected. Our current commissioner, Oliver Várhely's reputation is far from being immaculate. And that is simply one position obligatory to fulfill. And Hungary has problems even to fulfill that one. And yes, it definitely it boils down to V4 altogether as a brand being toxic to a large extent due to Hungary's behavior as an enfant terrible, which obviously in certain debates it might come handy and it might be useful, but altogether this is exactly the situation when we see that on the long term it backfires and it backfires tremendously. So no, I don't see that anything looks out for Hungary for that. I have not seen Orbán being super successful. We know about his negotiations and about his dreams joining ECR, for instance, but as we know, according to the recent news, that also remains a dream. And altogether, this is also super interesting what happens to Péter Magyar, because apparently, coming from nowhere, basically, he might be one of the few who might actually have some chance accidentally due to the EPP membership to any position, which is something absolutely unexpected. And as it was already mentioned about other top jobs regarding NATO, what we have seen is actually quite surprising, because Viktor Orbán's rhetoric was rather hatred-filled towards Mark Rutte. And earlier, he basically voiced the stance that he had supporting Klaus Johannes, for instance, and he told terrible things about Rutte. But overnight, it came out that basically the quid pro quo approach works here as well. So after his meeting with Jens Stoltenberg recently in Budapest, it came out that, well, it might even happen that Orbán supports Rutte's candidacy. And basically the quote in this quid pro quo was that Hungary is not going to put obstacles towards joint NATO actions, and is not going to veto probably going to veto less, knowing the realities, and it also receives some exemptions. So we see that clearly the situation is definitely a quid pro quo, but altogether Orbán's position in these negotiations seems to be far from strong.
Yes, thank you very much. Let's move on to Czech Republic. The current government cannot count on being in government after next year's election. I think they know it. But as you mentioned, Ms. Janebová, they have a quite successful Czech presidency behind themselves. They're sort of, I think, the golden children of the V4 in the European Union. Will Prime Minister Fiala and his oldest party try to get into the EPP and strengthen their position, at least in the European Union, since they can expect their position in Czech Republic to go down? And how does it affect the top jobs debate?
Thank you. I think in this moment, the Czech Prime Minister and the Czech representatives in Brussels, excuse me, are negotiating and trying to sort of leverage their support for the candidates for the top jobs to gain what they what they call one of the strong economic portfolios in the Commission. That has been something that has been constantly repeated in the discussion about the future of the European Union and the future of Czechia in the European Union after these elections, that we need a strong, or that we would like to get a strong economic portfolio in the European Commission. And it is true what Mr. Bilčík said about Czech political parties being represented in the strongest fraction, the EPP. We have the top 09, the Christian Democrats and STAN, who all are part of the present government coalition. However, I think it has been it has been also covered in the media that it has been quite limiting for the Czech Prime Minister, who is a member of the ECR, which ECR hasn't been part of the top negotiations about the top jobs. And somebody from his team has been quoted this morning in one of the Czech newspapers as saying that the Czech Prime Minister was essentially sidelined from these negotiations, which isn't great from the point of view of Czechia. When you look at the other biggest political groups in the European Parliament, we have no representation essentially in the SND because the Czech Social Democratic Party has been failing for quite some time now. And when you look at the Renew, Ano is a member of Renew. There have been some discussions about Renew essentially kicking out Ano because of its questionable liberal component of the programmatic of the party. I don't think there will be any appetite in Renew for getting rid of Ano at this moment because Ano has 6 MEPs after these elections, so they have quite a big representation. Yeah, it would probably be a logical step for the Civic Democrats to move sort of teams and leave the ECR for the EPP. However, I don't think that is going to happen because the leader of the list of the election list to the European Parliament, Alexander Vondra, and his positions are quite well aligned with the rest of the ECR group. And from what I've heard, it also doesn't seem that the Italian Prime Minister and the Polish Prime Minister would be open. The former Polish Prime Minister, whose party also is a member of the ECR, would be open to welcoming Fidesz in the ECR, which I guess if that happened, that would be a strong motivator for the Civic Democrats to leave the ECR. But at this moment, and as things are now, I think that that the Civic Democrats will stay in the ECR group.
Let's stay in this debate on rumored political switches in the European Parliament because that's very interesting to me. Mr. Bilčík, what do you think? Will Fiala join the EPP? Will Orbán join the ECR? Are there new groupings that you see happening? What are the rumors inside the EPP?
Well, I think rumors are subject to those who, make their living spreading rumors. I will look at the facts, and the facts are the EPP group was composed just this week. The final composition number stands at 188. A couple of members left. One is Jyrki Helveni, who left as a result, as a protest step to the admittance of the 7 new MEPs, newly elected MEPs, led by Peter Magyar from TISA. And I think this is for the moment, and for the foreseeable future, the final composition of the EPP group. I mean, the EPP group was very clear, saying at the start of its composition, there are a few clear conditions for anybody wanting to join the group and wanting to be a part of it. One of those is a general support for the priorities of the group. Secondly, general support also for the lead candidate for the presidency of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. And of course, a generally pro-Ukrainian stance when it comes to Russia's brutal and ongoing invasion. So these are some of the principal positions that have been publicly known. And I think for the moment, the composition of the group is final. Of course, when it comes to anybody else aligned with these priorities joining potentially in the future, that's always an open issue. And when you ask directly about the Czech ODS and the Czech Prime Minister, this has been an ongoing discussion. This is not new. But I do believe that at the moment it is not looking likely for various reasons, including those which have been very nicely summarized by our dear colleague from AMO from Prague. And I think looking ahead, we should work with the numbers which are at the moment there, and they should be the basis also for any discussions on the composition of the new European Commission and, of course, other institutions. So this is what I would say at the moment. And the EPP group is busy these days, working on the composition of the leadership of the group. The vice presidency and the presidency will be elected later today. And of course, the discussion will also focus on internal business in the European Parliament, including the elections of the President of the European Parliament. We haven't mentioned that post yet, but Roberta Metsola is clearly the front runner, and I think she's in a very strong position to be re-elected as the leader of the European Parliament. And of course, there are many rumors. There will be many rumors, but I don't see any major revolutionary moves in the next few days. Certainly when it comes to the broad political center, I think the numbers are pretty stable for the moment, and they will stay so because that also gives those who are in the center a strong position to influence the key decisions. And yes, this also puts, for instance, the Czech Prime Minister in a bit of a difficult position when it comes to negotiations in the European Council.
Thank you. I think Mr. Fiala is finding out he can't have his cake and eat it too. He cannot have a strong position in the European Union, current and Alexander Vondra. Ms. Takácsy, what about Hungary? Where will Fidesz go? It has been discussed at length whether it will join with Law and Justice in Poland, whether it will join the ECR or the ID, who will then leave the ECR if Orbán joins, or is Orbán happy not being in any group and being non-aligned?
Thank you for the question. I think this is very relevant. So this is not a coincidence this will be discussed at length, because eventually this is visible that no, Fidesz is not happy being not aligned, obviously, because it means a lot of influence being lost, a lot of connections being lost, a lot of information lost. So altogether, this is not a comfortable position, and especially looking at top positions, which still remain a dream for Fidesz, largely due to being non-affiliated. So I clearly see the intentions of wanting to join, but apparently Fidesz does not want to join just anybody who opens the doors. So the dreams of Fidesz have clearly been joining the ECR. And this is due to power politics, definitely. So even though Fidesz political identity, I think, stands a lot closer to ID And with regard to its self-definition, with regards to its stance on many issues. So ideologically, Fidesz would fit in with ID, I would say, a lot better than with ECR, given that ECR is predominantly an Atlanticist identity altogether. And well, if there is something that Orbán's rhetorics and Fidesz rhetorics recently does not share, this is the convention that that Hungary has to be loyal and a faithful pro-Western and Western ally. So altogether, Fidesz would fit ID a lot better than ECR. Yeah, they wanted to join ECR a lot more, given that this ECR would be large enough so that it could then probably cooperate with EPP, and that somehow this would be this right-wing dream, at least in Orbán's, according to Orbán. But apparently, as we have seen yesterday, there was a rejection voiced by Meloni. So apparently, this is not coming anytime soon, that Orbán would join ECR. But according to certain calculations, given that which parties of ECR have announced previously that should Fidesz join, they would leave. That counted actually 7 people, mostly from Nordic countries. So from Finland and I think from Denmark, if I remember correctly. So basically, it will mean that the ECR should the 10 representatives of Fidesz join ECR, and then if these 7 others who have announced their desire to leave should Fidesz join. So this would mean a relative plus to ECR, but apparently this was not enough. So apparently Orbán's, and especially Orbán's Russian affiliations, Russia-related expectations, ideas, and rhetorics are way too toxic for ECR to be incorporated. Well, the situation might change, however, should ID entirely exclude AfD from Germany. Because eventually, I think that in this case, ID could be a possible refuge for Fidesz. I know that AfD is already not part of the parliamentary group of ID, but to my knowledge, it was not entirely excluded from the entire party family yet. So as long as AfD is there, Fidesz is probably not going to join, given that that is probably too toxic even for Fidesz. But should this change, I think that ID might also come up as better than nothing, as an option, which is better than not being affiliated at all. So I think that obviously a lot of things might change yet, but I see that these are the major things to consider.
Yes, thank you very much. We can speak about Ursula von der Leyen and Roberta Metsola if we want, but I personally think that there isn't going to be very big stink regarding their positions. If you disagree, of course, we can discuss it. But we can return also to Donald Trump, and in a larger way, the defense questions regarding Russia, Ukraine, and European defense capabilities themselves. Because I think V4 represents just this jointness of this debate and the impossibility to follow and expect what these leaders of our countries will do. I don't think many people expected Pellegrini to support Mark Rutte in exchange for air defense. So what can we expect from V4 countries in the next 5 years in the question of security and defense? Let's start with Ms. Janebová.
Thank you. Admittedly, I'm not a defense or security expert, so I can just describe what the discussion looks like from my point of view. Czechia obviously has been one of the most vocal supporters of Ukraine, and Ukraine's victory, Russia's loss is defined as one of the key or vital interests of Czechia at this moment. And the Czech government even committed itself to increase the defense spending at 2% of the GDP this year, which, it can be only evaluated as a positive step, but it has been also very present in the current discussion that the 2% has been a number that was intended for peace times and not for these times, which even by the Czech government are defined as the worst, security environment since the Cold War, or even since the World War II, somebody said. So I think that Czechia, and speaking of this present government, which, as I mentioned, might be on their way out next year, I think it's a task for this government to actually put the money where the mouth is, because another overarching priority for this current Czech government has been maintaining a balanced budget and decreasing the level of the public debt, and that doesn't really go well together with increasing spending when it comes to defense. Yeah, so that would be it. Yeah, and of course there's the issue of the Czech ammunition initiative, which I think has inspired quite a lot of positive reactions, and has been interpreted as one of the biggest successes of the Czech foreign policy and Czech European policy recently. At this time, I would say the results are not that convincing, and yeah, let's see how that will turn out. But at this moment, I would say that perhaps the hopes that came with the initiative might not be fulfilled to the 100%.
Yes, Mr. Bilčík, what do you think about the V4 and security in the next 5 years?
I think, well, it's a very complex issue because we don't really have a coherent and cohesive V4, rather a very internally divided one. And I think when it comes to security and defense, this is one of the big tasks, also one of the big problems when it comes to the region, but also more broadly when it comes to Europe. Let me start by maybe having a side remark to your initial mention of the top jobs. For the moment, it looks like we might have a package deal on the 27th of June on the top jobs. I think this is going to be very important because it'll give a signal that Europe after elections has a general clarity where it's going, who is going to lead the key decisions, key institutions. And I think for the sake of political direction in times of war, because we are living the times of war, this is extremely important. If we don't have that deal by the end of this month, I think then we should start worrying. And in that sense, I agree with you that Ursula von der Leyen and Roberta Metsola look in safe positions, and I hope that stays to be the case when it comes to the European Council. The open issue is, of course, about the 5-year term of the presidency of the European Council. And I think this is going to be still up for big negotiations in terms of how that's handled. The EPP has the ambition, if the socialists get the top job in the European Parliament after 2.5 years, that the EPP should get the top job in the European Council. This is a discussion for the moment. But I also want to say, and I remember that as a sitting MEP, I was voting for Ursula von der Leyen, a secret vote in 2019 when she was nominated to lead the outgoing European Commission. She passed the European Parliament by a slim majority of 9 votes. 9 votes. And I'm saying this because the vote is going to be secret. Yes, there is a majority of over 400 MEPs in the EPP, Renew, and the SND, the big centrist democratic groups in the European Parliament. But not everyone in those groups is necessarily going to vote in a secret vote in favor of Ursula von der Leyen. So there has to be a cushion, and there has to be a clarity of the agenda, the priorities, and also basic commitments which will satisfy a safe majority in the European Parliament. And I think this is going to be the big political task for the summer. So I agree that the nominations are safe, but the vote is still something which has to be won, especially in the European Parliament. Now, in terms of the V4 and defense, Again, the key player here is going to be Poland. Is Poland, not just with Donald Tusk and his position in the European Council, but also the fact that the second largest national delegation in the EPP group comes from Poland after these elections, after the German delegation. And there is a clear ambition of Poland to really leave a greater mark on the key issue in Europe at the moment, and that's defense and security. I also understand that in the European Parliament, the defense subcommittee may become, in this term, a full-fledged committee, which may reflect also on the fact that the future commission may and will probably have a commissioner for defense. So this is all part of the bigger picture, and I think if there is one country to watch here from the region, it is especially Poland. What I want to say as a Slovak, and as a believer in V4 and the strength of Central Europe, is that it's two issues. One is that defense is not just about the hard weapons, and yes, we need to do a lot more when it comes to deliveries for Ukraine and when it comes to securing our own defense, more in terms of production, more in terms of cooperation, more in terms of investment, and we have to be faster. But it is also about the hybrid threats we are facing. Disinformation has become the number one threat, global threat, which has been identified by also experts working on the assessment of these threats in the World Economic Forum, for instance. And it is something which I think is very much a problem, especially in parts of V4, in my country, in Hungary, but also across the region. And I think this has to be an integral part of what we do also in the next institutional cycle in the Parliament, in the Commission. I hope this is taken up seriously for the sake of our strong ability to defend ourselves against the threats we are facing. And here, I think it is extremely important that our partners and friends in Warsaw, in Prague, pay a very, very close attention to what's happening in Bratislava and Budapest. And I think this is really a chance for V4 to come together in defense, not when it comes to only practical deliveries to our Ukrainian friends and partners, but also when it comes to supporting all those forces on the ground which are keen to take defense as a comprehensive issue, and in an area and in a region where we are most exposed at the moment. And I believe that parts of V4 are the weakest links in the EU27's ability to defend ourselves. And this also relates, to my last point, to what you raised as an overarching issue, what comes after the US elections. If there is a change of power in the White House, the exposure which we are facing here in parts of V4 may become even more problematic. And this is why I would again say that whilst the V4 is not playing a very important role, I think during the upcoming Polish presidency in the V4, but also the upcoming presidency of Poland in the EU Council, Poland takes over after Hungary. Let's discuss that as well in the first half of next year in the Council of the EU. It is extremely important that there is a very strong attention by our partners to forging all sensible and credible links to pro-European and the credible defense forces across the V4, including in Slovakia and Hungary.
Thank you. We're nearing the end of our debate. We have the last 15 minutes. So, Ms. Takácsy, I will broaden your question. What can we expect from Hungary in the next 5 years? What do you think its priorities and actions will be in defense, but also in all other areas?
So first of all, let's start with the closest one, which is the Hungarian presidency starting in July. So about that one, I would say that even though there were certain expectations, and obviously expectation in this term and in this sentence is something not necessarily positive. So I think that this was somehow the nightmare of many, that Hungary is going to take over, is going to be a disruptive player, is going to ruin a lot of things. Well, frankly, I do not see this as gloomy as it sounds. So eventually, probably the timing of this Hungarian presidency is not the luckiest one for Hungary, given that this is basically the time when the new positions are still being negotiated, when things do not properly work yet, when during the summer everyone is going to go on vacation and so on. And we know that the EU as a system, as a set of institutions, is not at its more efficient and effective these days. So I count on the Hungarian presidency on being a rather low-profile one, a pragmatic one, and a technical one. So recently, the Hungarian priorities set for this presidency were published. I do not see them as something super ambitious. So I think that this is going to be kept rather low profile without causing potentially a lot of harm to the whole alliance and to the whole of the EU. Well, but regarding the future, frankly, I'm not super optimistic. Let me explain why. So on the one hand, even though Hungary does not plan on leaving either EU, either NATO, so that seems to be rather clear. But there are a lot of steps on the Hungarian government side which I think raise concerns with a good reason. Let's take, for instance, the strategic cooperation on domestic security with China. It was basically a lot of things are there which we do not know about, but the fact that such a thing could happen recently is basically a very, very worrisome thing. So recently what we have seen is that according to the Hungarian government's rhetorics, Hungary's interest is not to align entirely with the Western alliance systems, but to kind of reinforce the connectivity with the East as well, and to be somehow as a bridge in a world where these two blocks are being reformulated again, and that according to the rhetorics, that is not in Hungary. But basically, all these explanations and plans are very contradictory, seem highly unlikely. So eventually, I see a large over there. So I do not think that these strategies are well-founded, well elaborated, and so on. So I see there are many problematic things. And well, regarding security, obviously we cannot get away from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That is going to be here with us, and we have to do something with it. And Hungary's stance on that, yet again, is something which is not necessarily helping the most to its partners, which is also very interesting because on the one hand, the Hungarian government likes to enhance and pinpoint the fact that, well, no, Hungary is not sending arms to Ukraine, not sending people, not sending basically anything, even though that is not true. So Hungary sent many things to Ukraine, but somehow this is never highlighted because it doesn't fit the narrative frames being used. So this is on the one hand with Ukraine, yet on the other hand, we see a large mission to Chad, Africa being planned and soon to be implemented on Hungary's side without any clear reason to a country which Hungary has absolutely no strategic interest in, which is on the brink of civil war and so on. So we see many worrisome things, I think, regarding security at the moment. And well, as a last thing, better change in the US presidency would turn the tables. That is a very good question because, as it was already mentioned, probably Trump himself does not know what Trump is going to do should he be in that seat. And for instance, in that sense, the already mentioned Hungarian-Chinese relations might definitely become a problem. So yes, I would love to say something optimistic, but frankly, I'm not super optimistic.
Yes, thank you. You mentioned the Chinese cooperation on security with Hungary. It reminds me of plans of Slovak government to cooperate with Russia on disinformation and hybrid threats, which also raised a lot of questions. But let's go to Czech Republic, and Ms. Janebová, maybe even speculate on the results of the next election. And overall, what can we expect from Czechia in the next 5 years?
Well, the Czech Prime Minister claimed that the priority agendas for Czechia in the European Union at the European level are security and competitiveness. Of course, he's speaking for the current government, but I think even if the government changes next year, that these priorities will not shift, because they also to a very large extent correspond with the public opinion as expressed by Czech citizens. So Czech citizens expect and wish for the European Union to ensure their security and competitiveness and sort of economic prosperity. I think also that we can expect whoever is in the government, we can expect the emphasis on the issues of cohesion in the European Union and the economic redistribution, support for Ukraine, and also enlargement. If the government changes next year and ANO is in charge, I think that the overall emphasis on the level of activity at the European level will be lower, because Andrej Babiš and the rest of the party are more focused on the domestic levels, and I don't think that they are that used to or that they are that interested in being active at the EU level, especially when their EU people left the country, left the party, essentially. I mean, the former MEPs, for example. And also what we would have to count on should ANO be in charge of the Czech government is a high level of unpredictability, which also was the case when Andrej Babiš was prime minister for the first time. Another area where I think they would be very cautious and also very outspoken would be acting against any sort of deepening of the European integration, which I guess also is an issue where the V4 countries are sort of aligned. And as I mentioned previously, we also might see more appetite from Czechia with Andrej Babiš or someone from ANO as a prime minister. We could expect more appetite of sort of reinvigorating the Visegrad 4 or Visegrad 3 if we count Poland out. But that, of course, is a speculation, and we would have to wait for the results of the elections.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that unpredictability seems to be the key word of today's debate. But let's go to Mr. Bilčík, and I think our colleagues from other countries are very interested in the question of what can the European Union expect from Slovakia in the next 5 years.
I'll answer as a politician. I hope that after 2027, Slovakia will have a different, more pro-European government with much greater ability to actually also navigate through European politics. I think many people in this country are going to be keen to work on that. So if you gave me the chance to pose that question, I think this is something which I would like to highlight. Elections decide who governs. At the moment, we have a government, we have the presidency in the hands of those people who have received the most number of votes. I fully respect that. But I also want to say that as a Democrat and as a committed European, I feel that we can and should do a lot better. So I hope that we can also see some positive surprises in this respect in coming weeks and months. And Slovakia is the smallest country in the V4. All of our neighbors are larger than we are. We are, in the best of senses, doomed to cooperative politics. Whenever we have done it, we've been able to gain the biggest possible gains, and we must return to this. This idea that there is some sort of a sovereign Slovak foreign policy which can succeed or gain allies anywhere outside of Slovakia is an empty illusion. It's an unfortunate waste of energy, and I hope it doesn't last longer than is the current mandate of the government. We must work together with our European partners, with the Czechs, the Poles, the Hungarians, as well as all the others in EU27, that's the only way forward to gain anything from this membership in the EU, but also to make a V4 a more relevant trademark for the region, but also for Slovakia. And I hope that that is going to be happening as much as possible in the current state of affairs. And I hope in a much more focused way beyond the 27 parliamentary elections.
Thank you. That was very political and optimistic answer. From my part, I will add that at EURACTIV Slovakia, we have been and will be following closely all the rule of law conflicts between the government and the European Commission. So if that ends up happening for the next 3 years at least, then we will be covering that. But that brings us to the end of our discussion, which has been very interesting. I think having panelists from all different countries adds a very welcome element of European Union cooperation to the discussion. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you to our viewers for their question. We answered all we could from our positions. So obviously we'll be also following the top jobs debate. So that's all from us at EURACTIV Slovakia, and have a great rest of the day. Goodbye.